Hi, it's Brain Bites with me, Dr. B. I'm Jess Beachkofsky, your friendly online psychiatrist. Let's dig in. Today, I want to talk about climate change. This is something that's kind of a new topic to me, coming from a psychiatric or a mental health perspective. But I read an article over the summer that got me thinking, and I just can't let it go. So I've been down that internet rabbit hole, checking out some more articles, looking at some research, and I have some stuff to share with you today. So, first of all, I want to talk about weather as a conversation topic. I feel like weather is one of those things that's spoken about as if it's too surface level and it's not a special topic and it's not really important enough to give credence to. But I would like to say I spoke with a colleague of mine and we both feel pretty strongly that weather is valid. Everybody has weather. No one can sign out of the weather conversation and say, like, well, I didn't have any weather today, so I don't have anything to add to this. And you're allowed to have opinions about weather. I don't have to like cold weather, and probably no one will hate me because of my opinion that cold weather kind of sucks. So I just want to say that we can talk a lot about weather and get a lot of value from those conversations, whether it's surface level with the person that you're sitting next to on transportation, or whether it's a checkout clerk that you're talking to, whether it's a client or a patient or a family member. These are all valid people to talk to about weather. Anyway, so my topic specifically about climate change is coming from the perspective of psychiatry and mental health. So the APA, my APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association, does identify this as a topic that should be a focus for psychiatrists when treating patients as well as in leadership positions. So it says, this is a thing, it matters, we should be talking about it. We should be leaders in the field. It's a doctor's job to do no harm. So, participating in information about climate change and trying to protect our patients that are impacted by disasters associated with climate change, these are things that are important, and these are things that we will be held to these standards. So, it's important to me to be paying attention to this, to look at what I'm doing in my practice and see how I could maybe make some positive changes towards addressing climate change. So this is kind of a new topic for me. So I'm not super familiar with everything that is surrounding this topic, but I just wanted to bring it up because I thought it was really interesting. And when I started looking at things, I was like, I feel kind of strongly about this, but I don't really talk to patients about it at all. So this might be an area where I might look at sort of branching out a little bit and sharing some information or finding out what people's thoughts are on certain things, especially if it's something that they seem to be having a lot of anxiety about, the uncertainty about the future, about how whether or not they can impact change. So, based on some of the stats I saw, the health sector contributes 8.5% of the national carbon emissions in the United States. So, I remember in medical school when I would do my rotations for surgical specialties, I was always amazed at the amount of waste. There's a lot of waste. By keeping things sterile and keeping people protected during surgical procedures, you have to go through a lot of stuff. And I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, there's so much. But there are some organizations that are working on cutting this down, trying to make carbon neutral situations. But that was one of the things that I remember noticing as a medical student that was kind of concerning. Now, right now, my carbon footprint is much smaller. I am a virtual provider, but that doesn't mean I have a zero carbon footprint. I obviously am using cloud space, and apparently that uses up a lot of energy. So that's a thing to keep in mind. So some of the things that are important for this is just helping patients work through the challenges of facing climate change, which is a real thing that is an imminent thing, and all of us are facing it. So for some of the patients that I treat that have schizophrenia or other severe mental illnesses, this is a real concern. So I'm currently in Florida. I practice in Florida, but I also see patients in Texas. So both of these are southern states. They're very warm. They're impacted a lot by climate change. And in Texas, where I see some of my sicker patients, a lot of those patients are on second-generation antipsychotics, which puts them at extra risk for any sort of heat-related illnesses. I have one patient in particular who loves to do yard work. He loves to go out and mow lawns. It's good for his neighbors. He likes the sense of community that he gets. He gets fresh air. He's out and about. He gets some exercise. But I have to be very careful about encouraging this in July during a drought in San Antonio because the temperatures sometimes exceed 115 degrees. And this is not a safe situation for this particular patient. So there are direct impacts of the climate and weather in how our patients or our clients or even our family members or friends are being impacted by changes in the environment. So, one of the big things that they have a lot of data on is air pollution. So, air pollution has increased, it's gotten worse due to the increase in temperature, the increased carbon emissions. There's a lot of stuff going on with that. And they're seeing some real physical medical changes that are happening in people. So it affects brain development, it can affect general health, it can affect allergies, it can cause neuroinflammation and cell death. So there are a lot of direct physiologic impacts that something like pollution can have on a person. So that's something to keep in mind. But not only that, I found a really interesting statistic I had never seen before. For every degree Celsius increase in the temperature, there is a 1% increase in suicide rate. I was mind blown. I read a couple of different articles about this, and this is one of the things that's most strongly correlated. So, increase in temperature, increase in suicide attempts. So, that's a pretty scary thing. It can increase also depression, anxiety, and aggression or irritability. So, that was notable, but really, suicide risk is the biggest thing. Like, that's pretty profound. Also, any kind of this increased heat can put people at risk for things like heat stroke and other medical emergencies. So another interesting impact of the change in the climate, especially with this warming trend, is that suddenly certain infectious diseases are finding their way into areas where they've never been before. So if there's a certain vector-borne disease, say malaria, that's carried by a certain species of mosquito, with the change in the environment, suddenly this mosquito is now available in more areas where it's going to be able to infect more people that didn't used to be exposed to this before. So now we're facing infectious diseases that are in new places that they weren't at before, just because of the climate change, and now creating a new environment that's more comfortable for some of these species for the vector-borne diseases. So that's kind of a scary thought as well. But of course, that also comes with other medical implications. So, people that struggle with some of these infectious diseases, they can have seizures, encephalopathy. There are other medical and potentially mental health implications that these diseases can have. And it all stems from climate change and the shifting of where these vectors are living. So there's immediate displacement. So we have immediate disasters, right? Like there's terrible hurricanes with flooding, or there's wildfires and people's homes get destroyed and there's loss and they are displaced immediately. They're facing challenges that were unexpected and are hard to manage. And then there are the slower things, like a slow rise in sea level that's long-term displacing people. So they're facing other challenges. And then, of course, with some of these increased droughts, the changes in the precipitation, where that happens, the changes in the temperatures, there's a lot more crop failure, and that's leading to starvation for many groups of people. And of course, we know that a certain amount of calories are required for brain development and sustaining. So that's not great either. Now, on top of this, there are some new words that are associated with the climate change and mental health problems associated with that. And so I'm going to share these. You guys might know them already, but I didn't. So the first is eco-anxiety, which is the fear of what is happening with climate change. So I think I have some eco-anxiety. A lot of people, it's scary, it's uncertain. We don't understand it that well. We don't know what's happening, how fast our change is going to happen, and what changes will they be, like what can we expect? Eco-anxiety, yeah, all about that. Eco-grief. This is the sadness about the destruction of species and natural habitats. So my kids don't know a lot about polar bears, but I think they experience some eco-grief just knowing the fact that polar bears are suffering. That's one of those species that everybody knows about, right? Like, oh, the polar bears are losing their environment, they're being limited to where they can go and all that sort of stuff. So that's a big deal. People are experiencing eco-grief because of the destruction of spaces that have certain species that we'll never have again. Then this is a very new word for me. Solstalgia. I think that's how you say that. this is nostalgia for landscapes that have changed. So if you have a special landscape in your heart, and over time, as climate has changed, this environment is no longer what it used to be. That change in the landscape and your loss, your sadness regarding the loss of that is called solstalgia. And then we have terraphuria and eco-rage. These are the reactions to betrayal and inaction by a government or leaders. So, I'm really upset. Our government isn't taking this seriously, isn't making the changes that it could make. There's not enough impact that's going to make positive change or slow this process. That's terraphuria, eco-rage. So these are some pretty neat words that are probably going to make their way into the lexicon here as this stuff becomes more and more prevalent. One of the big problems is the pessimism that comes from this. So people feel down. They feel upset about the idea. They feel like they can't impact change, or, anything they do is not going to have a big enough impact for 20 or 30 years. Nothing is going to happen, and it's just going to get bad and be terrible. And there's a lot of negativity and angst that comes along with that. So being able to provide some action for people or even for the community to help make positive changes, this is something that can help people feel more productive, like they have some agency over their lives, they can take some control and provide for the greater good. So, of course, one of the things we're always looking at is building resiliency. So dealing with these changes, the unknown, the anxiety surrounding it, that if we build that resilience, that will help all people to manage this crisis. So I mentioned before with patients that have serious mental illness, so not only are the medications that they're on putting them at risk, but they may have less resources available to them. They may have less access to what they need as far as housing when exposure is an issue, whether too hot, too cold, or disaster related. They may not have the cognitive abilities to manage these things well, or they are struggling with negative symptoms that keep them from being able to socially interact with people to get the help that they need. And then there's the medication issue. What if they are unable to get their medications, or if they are displaced and they can't get the prescription? These are real concerns to have. And of course, as I mentioned before with my specific patient, they are showing that in the data, schizophrenics have the highest odds of death in heat events. So that's really sad and really scary, but it's also something we can do something about through education and resources. All right. So some of the things that I thought were really interesting was some of the ways that we can impact our clients, patients, just people on an annual basis because of the cycle of climate. So in the springtime, we can provide resources about heat. In the summer, exposure, places people can go, things people can do to protect themselves. Same thing in the fall for winter exposures. Also providing vaccines. I'm a huge fan of vaccines. Herd immunity is a big deal. People getting sick, being less sick than they would be during flu season makes a big difference. So I have a virtual clinic, so I can't provide a vaccine clinic in my actual clinic because I am virtual. But there are many people that can provide vaccines in their clinics or other teaching opportunities where they can provide these sorts of resources for the community, for their clients, or for their patients. So that's another thing to keep in mind. I had never really been made aware of that, and that's kind of a cool way to provide resources. Even though everyone experiences weather, climate change affects people unevenly, and it can exacerbate inequalities. So even just with the patients with serious mental illness, these patients are going to be much more greatly affected than somebody who is more privileged and has more resources available to them. This is not a controversial thing. Like, humanity is facing climate change. There are real changes that are happening right now that are probably going to get worse before they get better. So this is something that we are facing, and we just have to figure out how we can build the resilience to manage things together as a community and do a better job. So I look at myself from some of the personal things. So personally, I do some little things. I don't drive very much because I work from home, but I compost. And compost tea, by the way, is excellent for your plants. So I compost. I have a compost pile outside for all of my vegetable scraps and coffee grounds. I use that. It's excellent. The worms love it, and so do the plants. And we recycle. We try to reuse things as much as possible. We make secondhand purchases when it makes sense. And we don't throw away a lot of things that can be used again. So even old holey shirts get cut up and used as rags. I try to pass that on to my kids. We minimize the use of disposable things like plastic bags. I don't buy individually wrapped stuff. So we just try to make the impacts where we can, and I try to express that with my kids, so hopefully they move on to make reasonable choices. I just thought that this was kind of an interesting topic because it's not something I ever thought about in the context of mental health treatment. So I am aware of it for myself, for my family, for my community. I think about it, I talk about it, I try to make small changes in my life to feel good about making an impact potentially, but I also am anxious about it and I wonder what will happen, and I worry a little bit about those apocalyptic views of, the movies without the zombies, but with the droughts, the dust bowls, the people that are fighting and are hungry, and all of that. I worry about that. And so that means if I'm worried about it, I know a lot of other people are worried about it too. So I am trying to open myself up to the idea of maybe having an impact in my clinic with my patients who may have extra anxiety about this. And if not, just building resilience around the idea of, the unknowns that are coming in the future, what's happening with this. And I am still going to talk to everyone about weather. I still find weather a fascinating topic. We can all talk about it. We can all have opinions and they're all reasonable. And I'm going to keep talking to people about weather. Anyway, I hope your brain is full of goodness, no calories required. Be sure to enjoy more tasty tidbits at brainbiteswithdrb.com. Thanks.